Hello everyone, welcome to Frightful Whispers. I'm here to guide you into the shadows tonight. I know you're using this video to unwind and drift off to sleep. So, before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you watching from? And what time is it for you? Now, get cozy, relax, and let the whispers of the night take over. It's funny how you never truly know how far a story can go until you're knee-deep in it. I used to think this was just going to be another hiking trip, a way to get away from the grind, enjoy the great outdoors, maybe tell a few spooky stories around the campfire. But that's not how it turned out. Not at all. I remember standing at the edge of that forest, looking into it. It was different from any forest I had ever seen. It wasn't just the trees, though they were massive and twisted, gnarled as if time itself had left its mark. It was the air, heavy, thick, suffocating. It almost felt like the forest was waiting for us. But I didn't want to admit that to anyone, not yet. "All right, guys," I said, trying to sound calm, like I had everything under control. That's what I always did, you know? I had to keep the peace, keep the group together. We were all counting on me, and if I let any fear show, they would pick up on it. So I put on my best smile and told them, "We've got a good hike ahead of us. Let's stay focused, keep moving, and we'll be back at the car in no time." Ryan, of course, was the first to poke fun. He always was. "Jake, you worry too much. It's just a forest, man. What's the worst that could happen?" Hannah, who always followed Ryan's lead with a laugh, chimed in. "Yeah, let's go. We're here for fun, not for ghost stories." And that's how we started, the five of us, walking along that path. It seemed innocent enough at first. The trees weren't much different from the ones we'd seen before. The path was clear, the air still. But something was off. Even before we set foot into the forest, I could feel the weight pressing down on me. It felt like the world was holding its breath, like the earth itself was watching us. Ryan, always the skeptic, was the first to comment on it. "You feel that?" he asked, glancing around with a frown. "The air's thick, man. It feels heavy, almost wrong." I tried to brush it off. "It's nothing, just nerves. You've been watching too many of those documentaries on haunted forests." But as we kept walking, I noticed it too. The trees felt bigger somehow, more oppressive, and the air, thick and heavy, seemed to swallow up every sound, every whisper. It was so quiet, so unnaturally still, that even my footsteps seemed too loud. Ryan, trying to ease the tension, started cracking jokes again. But there was an edge to his humor now. He wasn't as carefree as before. And it wasn't just him. The whole group felt it. The way the path seemed to narrow with every step we took. The trees pressing in from either side like they were closing us in. It felt like something was watching us. Something waiting for us to take one wrong step. I wanted to say something to reassure everyone, but the words wouldn't come. The forest... It felt different. It wasn't just any forest. The longer I stayed in it, the more I felt it, this strange, ancient energy that pulsed beneath the ground. The trees, with their twisted branches, seemed to move in ways they shouldn't. They creaked and groaned in the wind, but not in a natural way. It felt like they were alive, like they were waiting for us to come closer. "Are we sure this is the right trail, Jake?" Ryan asked, his voice suddenly quieter, less confident. He wasn't making jokes anymore. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw it in his eyes, the same thing I felt. Fear, pure, unshakable fear. "Yeah, we're fine," I said, trying to keep my voice even. But even as I spoke, I wasn't so sure anymore. The path had started to twist, to fork in directions I didn't remember. Every corner I turned, the trees seemed to get darker, their shadows stretching longer, like the forest was trying to swallow the light itself. And then, as if on cue, it happened. I saw it first, the faintest flicker of light. At first, I thought it was just the last rays of the sun breaking through the trees. But no, this was different. It flickered like a campfire, but it didn't fit the surroundings. The firelight wasn't warm, it was cold, almost unnatural. The shadows around it twisted, pulled, and shifted in strange, unsettling ways. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't sure if I wanted to ask, but I had to. I had to know if I wasn't imagining it. Ryan squinted into the distance, his smile now gone. "Yeah, what the hell is that?" Before I could stop him, Ryan was already moving forward toward the light. "Maybe there's someone up ahead. Let's check it out." "Ryan, wait!" I called, but it was too late. He was already ahead of us, Hannah and the others following reluctantly behind. I felt my heart race, the uneasy feeling growing heavier with every step we took. The closer we got, the more I realized that the light wasn't a campfire. It was something else entirely. It was a flickering flame, but not like any fire I'd ever seen. It seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, and as we neared the clearing, I felt a coldness settle over me. The kind of cold that makes your skin crawl, that wraps itself around your bones and sinks into your chest. And then, the whispers started. At first, it was so faint I thought it was just the wind, but no, it wasn't the wind. It was something else, something deeper, coming from the trees. A sound, soft and sinister, like a voice carried on the breeze. 1,000 voices, maybe more, whispering in a language I couldn't understand. "Guys," I said, my voice shaking now, "we need to leave, right now." But Ryan just laughed, though it was hollow, empty. "What's the matter, Jake? Are you scared?" I didn't answer him. I couldn't. All I could do was watch as we stepped closer to the fire, the flames flickering in that same cold, twisted rhythm. And as we approached, I swear I saw the trees move. They shifted, just slightly, as if they were reacting to our presence. The very air seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The light flickered once more, and then, without warning, a sudden gust of wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing the fire in an instant. The world went dark. And that's when I heard it. The forest, alive, breathing, whispering. It was waiting. It was always waiting. And now, we had walked right into its trap. It started as just another hike, one of those trips where you don't think much beyond the excitement of getting away from the usual noise of life. I remember thinking, this will be fun. But when I look back now, I can see how wrong I was. We walked into the forest like it was any other day. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and though the trees were old, they didn't seem strange at first. In fact, at the beginning, everything felt normal. Quiet, peaceful, even a little beautiful in that eerie way the forest can be. But as we walked deeper into it, something shifted. Ryan, ever the skeptic, was the first to speak up. "You feel that?" he asked, his voice low, his eyes scanning the trees as though he were trying to figure out if he was imagining something. "The air, it's thick, almost heavy." I thought he was just getting nervous, maybe buying into the ghost stories too much, but then I felt it too. There was something suffocating about the place. The trees were close, too close, their twisted limbs reaching out as if to pull us in. The quiet wasn't the peaceful kind. It was unnatural, pressing down on us like a weight we couldn't shake off. My heart started to race, though I tried to hide it, to keep the others from sensing my unease. I didn't want to worry them. Still, I couldn't ignore the feeling creeping up my spine. It wasn't just the isolation of the forest, it was alive. The trees, old, gnarled, and too still, seemed to have a life of their own, and the air, it tasted wrong. A stale, metallic taste filled my mouth as we walked, and the whispers started. At first, it was so faint I thought it was the wind, but then it became clearer, like voices, soft and indistinct, drifting in the air. No, I told myself, it's just the wind, it has to be. But it wasn't. The whispers were real, and the more we walked, the louder they grew. I didn't want to admit it, but I could feel it. The forest was waiting for us to come deeper, to step further into its embrace. "Guys, I think we need to turn back," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at my friends. But Ryan, of course, wasn't having it. "Come on, Jake, you're just freaking out. It's just a forest, man. Let's keep going." His voice was teasing, dismissive. But there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes now, even as he tried to make light of it. Hannah, trying to match his carefree tone, nodded. "Yeah, don't be such a baby. It's just a little spooky, that's all. Let's keep moving." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I could feel it in my gut, the way the trees closed in on us, the way the whispers grew louder, curling around my mind, urging me forward. I wanted to turn back, but something was drawing us in. Then, out of nowhere, I saw it, a flicker of light. Faint at first, like a campfire's glow, but too far off, too wrong. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. Something was off about it, about the way it moved. It didn't behave like a normal fire. It was erratic, almost alive, pulsing in the air as if it were drawing us closer. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice shaking. I didn't want to acknowledge the fear building inside me, but there it was. The others glanced around, confused. "Where?" Ryan asked, squinting toward the trees. Then, his face split into that confident grin of his. "Ah, it's probably just a fire. Some other hikers, right? Let's go check it out." Before I could say anything, he was already moving toward it. Of course he was. Ryan had always been the one to chase after the strange, the unusual, never thinking twice. And now, we were all following him. I didn't want to. I wanted to leave. I should have said something. But something about that fire, something about the way it flickered and danced in the dark, compelled me forward. The closer we got, the more wrong it felt. The trees grew even darker, their branches reaching down, twisting into shapes I couldn't quite understand. The forest felt too alive, too aware of our presence, and the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The fire was no longer just an ember in the distance. It was an inferno, bright and consuming, but cold, cold in a way I couldn't explain. And that's when I saw him, a figure emerging from the shadows of the trees. At first, I thought it was one of us, maybe a trick of the dim light, but then he stepped forward, and I knew this wasn't one of us. This man, bent and twisted, his skin pale as though the sun had never touched him, was no traveler, no wanderer. His eyes, those hollow eyes filled with a terror I couldn't understand, a terror that reached into me. "You've made a mistake," he rasped, his voice low, each word seeming to come from the depths of a well. A terrible mistake. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I took an instinctive step back. The old man's eyes never left mine. "You need to leave, now, before it's too late." Ryan laughed. Of course he did. "What, you some kind of forest ghost, old man? Come on, we're just passing through. This is just some abandoned trail. We're fine." The old man's gaze didn't waver. He stepped closer, and I saw the real fear in his eyes. Real fear. The kind that comes from knowing something you don't want to know. This place, it isn't just a forest. It's alive. It's hungry. and it's waiting for you." Hannah stepped forward, nervously laughing. We're fine, okay? This is just a spooky story. We're not falling for it." But the man wasn't laughing. His voice grew desperate. "It feeds on the lost. The fire." He pointed toward the flickering light in the distance. "It's not just fire. It's part of a ritual. It pulls people in. It traps them. It takes them forever." A cold sweat broke out on my skin. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The words echoed in my head, but I didn't want to hear them. I didn't want to understand. "This isn't a joke," the old man said, his voice low, nearly pleading now. "You've walked into its domain. The forest owns you now." Ryan scoffed. "This is nuts, man. You're out of your mind." But the man didn't flinch. His eyes were wild, staring right through us. "It's too late. You don't leave. It doesn't let you leave." I turned to Ryan, to Hannah, but their faces were pale now, their confident smiles gone. The fire flickered once more, but this time it wasn't just light. It was a signal, a warning. And as I stood there staring at the old man, whose face was now twisted in an expression of dread, I knew. We weren't going to leave. The forest had already claimed us. It all started so innocently. I thought it would be just another hike, nothing more than a weekend getaway to clear my head, a chance to escape the noise of life. But I should have known better, because this place, this forest, wasn't like any other. We set off into the woods with that casual excitement, the kind you get when you're with friends, walking through an unfamiliar but beautiful landscape. At first, everything was fine. The trees were tall and gnarled, their branches reaching like twisted fingers into the sky, but the sunlight filtered through them in a way that made the shadows seem less menacing. The birds, though quiet, had an eerie calmness to them, but nothing so far seemed wrong. It felt like just another place, until it didn't. The deeper we went, the thicker the trees became. The air grew heavier, almost like it was thickening around us, pressing in. I glanced over at Ryan. He was the first to speak up, and not in his usual joking tone. "You feel that?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. He wasn't laughing now. "The air, it feels wrong." I brushed it off. "It's just the forest, Ryan. You're imagining things." But I wasn't so sure anymore. Something about the way the trees stood still, their limbs twisted in ways that didn't seem natural, made me uneasy. The air wasn't right, it wasn't cold, but it had a strange weight to it. The quiet was too complete. There were no sounds of wildlife, no rustling in the leaves, not even a breeze. It was as though the world was holding its breath. I told myself it was nothing, just nerves. It wasn't the forest, it was just me. But as we kept walking, that feeling grew stronger, this pressure, like something unseen was watching, waiting. The whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, but when I stopped to listen, I realized there was no wind at all. The trees, they were whispering. Not in the way the forest sometimes does with the soft rustling of leaves. This was different. These were voices, not words, but something deep and wrong that slithered into my mind and made my pulse quicken. It sounded like hundreds of voices, low and indistinct, all speaking at once, pressing in on me, on us. "Do you hear that?" Hannah asked, her voice a tremor of fear. She had heard it too. I didn't answer her. I couldn't. I was too busy looking around, my eyes darting to the shadows between the trees. The forest was closing in on us. The path we had followed no longer felt like a path. The trees, they weren't just trees. They were alive. They were watching us. "Jake," Ryan's voice was sharp now, edged with panic. "We need to go back, right now." I could hear the panic in his voice, feel it echo in my chest. But it was already too late. The path was gone. The trees had shifted, twisted, and we were trapped. The clearing we had reached wasn't a clearing anymore. It was a cage, and we had walked right into it. And that's when I saw it. A flicker of light, the fire. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but no. There it was, glowing in the distance, just beyond the edge of the trees. A strange, cold light, flickering like a flame, but it wasn't warm. It wasn't right. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as the coldness hit me, the chill creeping up my spine. "Do you see that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, even though I knew they saw it too. Ryan's lips curled into that arrogant smirk he always wore, but it was thinner now, less confident. "It's just a campfire, Jake. There's probably someone else out here." But even as he said it, I could see it in his eyes. He was as unsure as the rest of us. There was something wrong about that fire. It didn't behave like a normal fire. It wasn't warm, it didn't crackle, and it didn't seem to belong here. It flickered in ways that made my heart pound, as if it was alive, and it called to us, pulling us closer. Against every instinct screaming at me to turn around, I followed Ryan. We all did. We moved toward the flickering light, our steps slow, hesitant but driven by some force I couldn't name. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was the forest itself, beckoning us, waiting for us to step too far. And then, out of nowhere, I felt it, the presence, the feeling that something was behind me, watching me. I turned around, and there he was. The old man. His face was gaunt, twisted with age and fear, his eyes wide, his skin pale like something long dead. His clothes were torn, weathered, and his hands shook as he stepped toward us from the shadows of the trees. "You've made a mistake," he rasped, his voice hoarse, barely above a whisper. "A terrible mistake." I froze. His eyes locked on mine, and for the first time, I felt the weight of those words sink into me like a cold blade. "Go back," he pleaded, his voice rising with urgency. "You don't understand. This forest, it's not what you think. It's alive. It feeds on those who come too close." Ryan, never one to back down, scoffed. "We're just hiking, man. What are you talking about?" The old man's expression twisted into something close to agony. "The fire," he said, his voice cracking. "The fire, you see. It's no accident. It's part of a ritual, a trap. This forest, it traps souls." I felt my stomach drop. The fire, the whispers, the way the forest felt like it was closing in on us. My breath quickened. I turned toward Ryan, my mouth dry, and tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. I couldn't say anything to make him believe me. But then, the ground shifted. A low rumble deep beneath our feet, like something ancient waking from its long slumber. The trees groaned, their branches creaking like they were reaching for us, curling inward. "Get out!" the old man shouted, his voice filled with fear. "It's too late now. You've already crossed the line." And that's when it happened. The fire, once just a faint flicker, erupted into a blaze that wasn't just fire. It was alive, the flames swirling and twisting in ways I can't describe. It reached for us, wrapping around the old man first. He screamed, but the sound was lost as the fire consumed him, devoured him whole. We didn't move, we couldn't. We were frozen in place, caught in the gaze of the forest, trapped by the thing it had been waiting for. One by one, the trees closed in, their limbs reaching down like hands, and the fire, it burned cold, cold enough to freeze you from the inside out. Hannah screamed. Her voice broke through the nightmare, but I couldn't reach her. The trees had already closed in, their branches twisted tight around her body, pulling her into the darkness, her body disappearing into the forest. And then it was just me, alone, the fire still flickering in the distance, its cold fingers reaching for me. I tried to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't respond. I could feel the forest, the trees, the earth beneath me. It was all closing in. And that was when I realized it had already marked me. It wasn't just taking us one by one, it was claiming us. And I was next. I don't know why we thought this was a good idea. In hindsight, it seems absurd, but at the time, I didn't know what was waiting for us in those woods. I didn't understand the warnings, the whispers, the presence that had been there long before we stepped foot into the forest. But now I know. I know exactly what we awakened. At first, it was just like any other hike. We were laughing, teasing each other, excited for the adventure ahead. I didn't notice how the air began to change at first, how thick and heavy it felt. But it was there, creeping into the atmosphere, a weight that grew with every step. The trees towered above us, their gnarled limbs twisting like fingers, and the further we went, the less the sun seemed to reach us. The light from above felt dimmer, like the forest was swallowing it up. Ryan had been the first to notice. "You feel that?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. He was always the first to notice when something was off, always the first to mock the eerie rumors. But this time, his usual bravado was missing. "It's like the air's different." I didn't want to admit it, but I felt it too. The stillness, the quiet that pressed in on us, suffocating any sound we might have made. I looked around, expecting to see some wild creature, maybe an animal, rustling through the underbrush, but there was nothing. It was as though the forest itself had gone silent. I should have listened to the old man. He had warned us, shouted at us, begged us to leave. His voice was cracked, desperate, but none of us took him seriously. How could we? He was just some deranged hermit living out here, right? We were fine. We were just a group of friends on a hike. But the moment I saw that flickering light in the distance, something shifted inside me. Something cold and heavy sank into my chest. The fire, small and faint at first, pulsed like it was alive, unnatural, calling to us. "I'm not going any further," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sudden pounding of my heart. But of course, I was ignored. Ryan had already started moving toward the fire, his eyes glinting with excitement. "Come on, it's just a campfire. There's probably other people out here," and so we followed. The closer we got, the more I could feel it. Something wrong. It wasn't the fire, it was everything. The trees were too still, the air was too thick. And the fire, it didn't behave like any fire I'd ever seen. It was cold, cold like the grave. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, barely audible over the crackling of the flames, but they grew louder. I looked around, trying to find the source, but there was nothing. Just the trees, their branches swaying in ways that didn't make sense. It was as though they were listening, waiting. And then we saw him, the old man. He had followed us, his twisted form moving through the shadows, his eyes wide, unblinking, as though he had been watching us all along. "You've made a mistake," he rasped, his voice thin and shaking but desperate. "You have no idea what you've done." Ryan, of course, laughed it off. "What, like you're some kind of forest ghost? Come on, old man, we're fine." But the man's eyes never left us. His expression twisted with fear and sorrow, and he whispered again, more urgently this time. "You don't understand. The fire, it's a ritual, a trap. This forest, it's alive. It pulls you in, claims you, and once you are here, there's no escaping. The fire doesn't just burn, it traps your soul, forever." I didn't know whether to laugh or run, but the chill creeping down my spine, the way the trees around us seemed to lean in closer, told me that he wasn't lying. And that's when it happened. The ground beneath us cracked, a deep, rumbling growl that shook the air. The trees around us groaned like they were coming alive, their limbs bending, stretching, moving with a horrible, deliberate purpose. I looked up to see the branches reaching down, not in the natural, swaying way they should, but in a coiling, grasping way, as if the trees themselves were trying to take us. Ryan tried to laugh it off, his usual cocky grin faltering. "What the hell's going on? This is nuts." But before I could answer, the fire flared up again, hotter than before, roaring to life with a force that sent a shockwave through the clearing. It didn't feel like a normal fire. The heat wasn't warm, it was cold, freezing. I could feel it biting at my skin, pulling at my very soul, like it was trying to consume me from the inside out. The old man screamed at us, his voice wild with terror, but I could hardly hear him over the roar of the fire. The trees were alive, their trunks creaking and groaning, their branches snapping like bones, reaching for us. I tried to run, to turn back, but my legs wouldn't move. The ground beneath me had changed, softened like the earth itself was sucking me down. Ryan screamed, and in that scream I heard the terror in his voice for the first time. He was trying to back away, but it was too late. The fire, that cold, cursed fire, wrapped around him, twisting around his body like a serpent. I couldn't move, I couldn't reach him. He was pulled into the flames, his body consumed by the cold fire, and in an instant he was gone. Nothing left but a wisp of smoke and the faintest hint of his scream hanging in the air. I could barely breathe. I couldn't breathe. The air was too thick, too heavy. And then, without warning, the trees closed in. Their limbs reached down toward us, snaring Hannah in their grasp, pulling her into the shadows, her body vanishing into the dark depths of the forest. I was alone. But I wasn't alone for long. The whispers came again, louder this time, as if they were calling me by name. I turned, trying to escape, but there was nowhere to run. The fire, the trees, the forest. It was all closing in around me, its grip tightening like a vice. And then I saw it. A shape in the distance, tall and unnatural. It moved through the shadows like it was made of the very darkness itself, its limbs twisting in ways that no creature should be able to. I could feel its presence pressing down on me, a force that I couldn't escape. Its eyes, I could feel its eyes were on me, and in those eyes I saw the truth. The forest was alive. It had been waiting for us, waiting for me, and now it had me. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the earth, by the trees, by the fire. The ground trembled beneath me and the trees closed in. And then it spoke. "You belong here now." And just like that I understood. I had been chosen. I had crossed the line, and now there was no going back. I was part of the forest. Forever. I can still feel the weight of the forest pressing down on me, even now, even as I try to write it down, to make sense of it all. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for us to step too far, and we did. We stepped too far. At first, it was just a hike. I had no reason to feel uneasy, no reason to doubt the path we had chosen, the adventure ahead of us. Ryan was cracking jokes, Hannah was laughing, and I was just trying to keep it together. You know, play the part of the leader. But even then, something was off. The air, the way the trees stretched too high, too thick, the shadows that lingered longer than they should. It was like the forest was watching us. Ryan noticed it too, eventually. "You feel that?" he asked, looking around as if trying to spot something just beyond the trees. I wanted to brush it off, tell him it was nothing, that we were just in our heads. But I felt it too. The air was heavy, the path seemed too quiet, too still, and the trees, they were too silent. It was as if they were waiting for us to make a mistake. We kept moving, but each step felt like it was drawing us deeper into something we couldn't escape. And then, there it was. A flicker of light in the distance. A fire. But not like any fire I'd ever seen. It didn't look right, it didn't feel right. I could feel my pulse quicken as I stared at it, and for a moment, I thought I imagined it. But no, it was there. A cold, flickering flame, glowing in the distance, just beyond the trees. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking as I pointed. "Do you see it?" Ryan, ever the skeptic, shrugged it off. "Probably just a campfire. There's probably other people out here." But that fire, it wasn't like the others. It wasn't warm. It didn't crackle in the air the way a fire should. No, this fire was cold, and it drew me in like a moth to a flame. It called to me, even though I didn't want to answer. But something inside me told me I had to, and so we moved toward it. And the further we went, the worse it got. I don't know when it started, the shift, the way the forest changed around us. The trees started to twist, their limbs contorting into shapes that didn't belong in nature. The shadows grew deeper, darker. The air was thicker now, like the forest was pressing down on us, making it harder to breathe. And then, just as we neared the clearing where that fire burned, we saw him, the old man. He emerged from the darkness between the trees, his eyes wide with terror, his skin pale like he hadn't seen the sun in years. His clothes were torn and dirty, his body hunched over like he had been out here for far too long. His voice was ragged, desperate as he stumbled toward us. "You've made a mistake," he rasped, his voice trembling. "You need to leave, now." I didn't know what to say. His eyes were wide with fear, his gaze darting around like he was being hunted. I didn't believe him at first. How could I? This was just some old man living in the woods. He couldn't possibly know what we were walking into. But the more he spoke, the more I realized that he wasn't just scared, he was warned. And maybe we should have listened. "The fire," he croaked. "It's not just a fire, it's part of a ritual, a trap, the forest. It feeds on those who wander in. The fire doesn't burn to destroy, it burns to trap, to hold souls, forever." I wanted to laugh it off, wanted to tell him he was just a crazy hermit, but something about the way he said it, the way he looked at us, made me think he was telling the truth. I felt it in my bones, that cold, gnawing feeling that this wasn't just some campfire, this wasn't some hiking trip. Something was terribly, terribly wrong. And then it happened. The ground shook, not like an earthquake, but like the earth itself had woken up. The trees groaned, their trunks creaking like they were stretching. The air grew heavier, pressing in from all sides, and I felt my heart race in my chest. The fire flared up, brighter this time, like it was feeding on the terror that filled the air. Ryan turned, his face pale now, his mouth opening in disbelief. "What the hell is that?" he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. The forest was alive, alive. It moved, it groaned, it reached. The trees, they reached for us, their limbs bending down like claws, their roots crawling up through the soil. I tried to move, tried to run, but the ground shifted beneath me. The path was gone, there was no way out. And then the fire. The fire wasn't just fire anymore, it wasn't heat, it wasn't flame, it was alive. The coldness of it wrapped around me, pulling me toward it, and I could feel it, feel the pull, like I was being drawn into something far darker than anything I could comprehend. I turned to run, but before I could take a step, I saw it. The shadow in the trees. The figure I had seen from the corner of my eye. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could explain. It moved in a way that defied everything natural. Its limbs, long, twisted, and impossibly thin, slithered through the air, its form flickering between the shadows and the trees, an ethereal presence, like it wasn't entirely here. And then it spoke. But it wasn't a voice. Not like any voice I'd ever heard. No, this was thought. It was a presence, a force. And when it spoke, I didn't hear it in my ears. I felt it in my mind. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a command. It was a statement, a fact. You cannot escape. And I understood. In that moment, I understood. I tried to scream, but my voice was swallowed by the earth. The fire burned brighter now, its cold flames reaching toward me, wanting me, needing me. The trees closed in on all sides, their branches twisting tighter, pulling me toward the center of the forest. I could feel the earth dragging me down, roots crawling around my ankles, my legs like they were trying to pull me into the dirt, into the very heart of the forest. I knew it was too late. The forest had claimed me. I was part of it now. There was no escape. "You belong here," the voice whispered again, as the darkness closed in. And then, just as I thought the earth would swallow me whole, as I thought I would disappear into the forest forever, the fire flared one final time. But this time, it wasn't cold, it was hot. It burned with an intensity I could feel deep inside me. And as I reached out toward it, my body trembling, my fingers brushing the flames, I realized with a sickening certainty, this was it, this was the end. The fire was not the key to escape. It was the final, cruel reminder that the forest was in control. The fire, the forest, the trees, they owned us. All of us. And now, I was part of it. Forever. I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't think it could. But as I stand here now, trapped in the heart of the forest, caught in its twisted, unyielding grasp, there's no other way to put it. I've been claimed. I am part of it now, and I will never be free. At first, it seemed so simple. Just a group of friends out for a hike, away from the noise of life, eager to experience something a little different. Maybe tell a few spooky stories around a fire. But the moment we crossed that threshold into the forest, something shifted. Something watched us from the shadows. Something that wasn't just the trees or the animals. Something much older. It was the forest itself, breathing, watching, waiting. I didn't realize how far we had gone until it was too late. The deeper we ventured, the more it closed in around us. The trees seemed to stretch higher, their limbs reaching toward the sky in unnatural angles. And the whispers, they started low, like a distant breeze, but soon they filled the air. The forest was speaking, and I could hear it. Hear them. Thousands of voices, all murmuring at once, too low to make sense of, but enough to make my skin crawl. And then came the fire. I saw it first, a small flicker in the distance like a candle in the dark. But it wasn't just any fire. It was cold, cold as ice. It beckoned us. We couldn't resist. I couldn't resist. I wish I had. I wish I had listened to the old man when he warned us, when he begged us to leave. But I didn't. None of us did. We laughed it off. We were young, foolish, invincible. And when we reached that clearing, when I saw the fire burning bright and cold, I should have turned back. But I didn't. We didn't. The flames, they didn't burn like fire should. They didn't crackle. They didn't warm the air. They froze everything around them. And in those flames, I saw faces. Faces of people I didn't recognize. People who had been here before. People who had been taken by the forest. The fire didn't destroy them. It trapped them. It held them, their souls lost in the forest, bound to it forever. That was when I felt it. The pull. The forest reaching for me. The earth below my feet began to tremble, as if the forest itself was waking up, stretching, coming to life. And that's when I saw it. The figure, cloaked in shadow, moving between the trees. It wasn't human. It wasn't anything I could recognize. It was a presence, an awareness. And when it spoke, its voice didn't come through my ears. It came through my mind. You can't escape. And then it moved. The trees reached for us, their limbs twisting like snakes, bending in impossible angles, pulling us toward them, pulling us into the earth itself. The forest was alive, and it wasn't just trying to capture us, it was hunting us. I tried to run, I couldn't. The ground beneath me shifted, the trees bent in on me, the roots burst through the soil, grabbing at my ankles, pulling me down. I could feel them, the roots. They were alive, like tendrils, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into the soil. The whispers were louder now, closer. The voices were no longer a murmur in the distance. They were in my head, in my skin, in my bones. And then, like an animal caught in a trap, I was dragged under. I was sinking into the earth, into the roots, into the very heart of the forest. And that's when I saw them. Ryan, Hannah, the old man. They weren't gone, they hadn't disappeared into the flames. They had become the forest. Their faces, hollow, their eyes empty, stared at me, their bodies twisted, stretched like the trees themselves. "You're one of us now," Ryan's voice whispered. But it wasn't his voice. It was the forest's voice, and it echoed in my mind, in my soul. "You belong to the forest now, forever." The horror sank in. It wasn't just the forest that had claimed us. It was the fire, the ritual. It didn't burn to destroy, it burned to trap. The forest didn't kill us, it kept us. Our bodies were buried deep in the earth, our souls entwined in the roots, feeding the forest. And that's when I realized the true horror. We weren't just its victims, we were its vessels, its parts, its servants. Forever. The figure moved closer, its shadow stretching out like claws, reaching toward me. Its eyes, if you could even call them eyes, were holes in the darkness, empty, devoid of anything human. But in those eyes, I saw something worse than death. I saw the truth. You will never leave. You will never escape. I tried to scream, but the forest swallowed it. Just like it had swallowed Ryan, just like it had swallowed Hannah, just like it had swallowed everything. There was no escape, no way out. The forest owned us now. And then, in a sickening twist, I realized something even worse. I had crossed the line, I had entered the forest, just like the others, just like the countless souls before me. And now I understood. I wasn't just here because I had walked too far. I was here because it wanted me. The forest had been waiting. It had been waiting for me, for us, and now I was part of it. You belong to us now. I was no longer Jake. I wasn't anything. I was nothing. The forest had taken me, just like it took the others. I was a part of the trees, a part of the roots, a part of the fire. And as the darkness closed in around me, I knew that I would never escape. I would never see the world again. I would never see them again. I was the forest's now, and it would never let go. Thank you for venturing into the shadows with me here at Frightful Whispers. Remember, the darkness holds secrets, but also whispers truths to those who dare to listen. If tonight's tale sent shivers down your spine, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. It helps keep the fire of fright alive. Rest easy, but keep one eye open, for the night is never truly still. Until we meet again, stay vigilant, stay curious, and let the whispers guide you.